Good morning, everyone.
Good
Welcome
morning.
to the Day After Sunday, a podcast here at White Rock United Methodist Church. It is Labor Day, so happy Labor Day to everybody. Rebecca, happy Labor Day to you.
Yes, you too. So I'm Rebecca Garrett Pace, and we don't have our fancy intro and outro today because Mitchell is taking a time of rest, which is good. And we realized this morning that he has the fancy intros and outros.
He is the holder of the intros and outros, and yes, thank you. So I'm Phil Dickey, right? Even though we don't have the music, I'll just still go ahead and say it. So yeah, we don't have our lovely intro and outro, but that's okay, right? We'll just
totally
switch
fine.
things up here a little bit. We'll take a rest from our usual intro and outro.
Absolutely, and I liked that you offered earlier to sing the little background music.
If this is your first time on the podcast, you're probably like, what is happening right now? But that's okay. Welcome. We're glad you're here.
Yeah, we are very glad you're here. If you're watching live, comment, let us know that you're here. And if you come across this later on, Spotify or wherever you get your audio podcast, then welcome. We're really glad you're here. Absolutely. If you weren't able to join us in worship yesterday, you can catch up on what we're talking about on our Facebook Live or our YouTube channel. It was a beautiful service. We talked a little bit in the Sunday sit down that this is sort of a threshold Sunday, that we didn't have it wasn't part of a worship series. It kind of stood on its own as specifically a time of rest and breath. And I didn't know how much I needed that. I knew, but I didn't know.
I would love to just kind of pick your brain about that, because I'm so curious. So if you are new to White Rock, or if you're new to this channel or whatever, Rebecca is the keeper of all things worship. Like it's not only her title, it's also just like who she is, and she really keeps us really glued together and tied together. And so and she's a really good idea person too on a lot of this stuff. So I'm curious for you, are you more comfortable in a series where it's been thought out and planned and everything versus kind of these one-offs where it's like there's not a theme and there's not a thread, or do you feel like it gives you more opportunity to kind of flex your creativity beyond just like feeling tied to a series? Does that make sense, that question?
It makes sense, yeah. For me, it's not better or worse. It's just different because even I always work in overarching themes. So I've worked in churches where the pastor, went off the lectionary, which if you don't know what that is, it's it's planned out readings that kind of guide the church throughout the year. And I still am able to find kind of the threads that go together. So for me, it's not better or worse. Yesterday, I was able to really focus in on the theme of Sabbath of Rest. And that really, I was very excited for Lisa Tess to read our Psalm 149. I was reading it on my own. And I read as my struggle with we've talked about that on this podcast too. We'll be going happy-go-lucky, praise God, and also make sure you kill all my enemies. Wait, what?
Right, dash the babies' heads on the rocks.
Oh gosh, there's some awful stuff. But I still, I learn from them every time I read them. And Psalm 149, at least the first 5 verses, talk specifically about this. They even say praise God on your couches, sing for joy as you are on your couch. And so when I read that, I was like, this is great, because that's what people are doing right now,
Right.
And it gives permission.
It's such a fascinating text, and I love that you included that in there. It's such I don't know, like you said, it's perfect, right? Like this is such a perfect psalm to be read on a day of rest and in the midst of this pandemic, and it's fantastic. So where did you find it? Were you just reading along and just happened to come across it? Is that what you said?
Yeah. So I read Forward Day by Day, which is an Episcopal resource, and their daily prayer has morning psalms and evening psalms. So I try to practice morning prayer and evening prayer. And when I wake up in the middle of the night, worried or stressed, I do a midnight prayer too. But yeah, I just came across it again, kind of anew. And I was like, this is perfect. I'm always, people say I'm a workaholic. So I'm always thinking about how this can fit into the liturgy.
I think whenever you're constantly creating things, that's what's always in your mind, right? How does this fit in? Or how does this fit in? Yeah, I hear that. No, that's cool. So I was really curious about the word couches in the Hebrew, just because I thought there's no way they had to take some liberties in the translation, right? Of using this term, and I went and looked it up, and I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. It's like, well, I'm going to try apparently. Miskabautam. I mean, I don't know. I don't read Hebrew well, and I don't speak it. So, but in the original like the most literal translation, it says their beds, which I think is even more interesting, right? Like not only from their couches, but from their beds. It's a term that I think was used 4 times: once in Psalms, once in Isaiah, once in Hosea, and once in Micah. How interesting, right?
I know. Yeah, and you get these, similar words in. Oh my goodness.
Sorry, little dude's not happy out there.
God bless little dudes who aren't happy today. You get similar words, right? I mean, especially in palaces, people had kind of lounges, and this notion of relaxing, right, was so much. It was so honored in the Hebrew culture, and I think something Mitchell brought out in his sermon, which I need to hear over and over, is the difference between Sabbath and just vegging out, tuning everything out, pretending like just binging Netflix is the same thing as taking a day off. I think that's a lie we tell ourselves that we really need to get over if we're going to tap into what rest really is.
We talked about this a little bit in the Sunday sit down, and Thomas is screaming again. A little bit in the Sunday sit down, right? That I think rest can be different for a lot of people, right? And so some people, like, that may be the binging on Netflix thing may be really what they need in that time and in that moment. But I think typically, Sabbath is way more than just like, I'm going to lay on my couch or on my bed and not do a thing, for an entire day. Because Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, like, I think they are both needed, but they are not both the same. And we get into some trouble when we confuse the two. I agree with you. Sometimes you do need a day to completely zone out, especially if you've been under a lot of emotional stress. That's part of, I speak from experience. You brought this up in the prayer. Like my grandma passed away on Friday. It's been a rough several days. And sometimes when you've been in very deep emotional turmoil, you need to zone out. You need to, like, numbing is not always a bad thing. But I think, I'm rambling a little bit, but I think the point is, like, they're different and they're both really important. So when I decide to take a Sabbath, that should look different than when I decide to, like, just emotionally zone out for a few hours. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think sometimes the difference can even be intentionality, right? The built-in practice of Sabbath was this intentional idea that on a schedule, a routine, you're going to have a specific practice of what this looks like. And that doesn't mean it has to be the same the exact every time. But like, I think about my friend who does live in Jerusalem, who is Jewish, and like, whenever I got to go and be with her and study there for a while, she, like, Jerusalem shuts down, right? Like Friday night to Saturday night, like it just shuts down. And if anyone's going anywhere, they're walking because they don't drive. And but you end up seeing all these families outside playing together because there's just an intentional time of Sabbath means being with your family and having like this opportunity to have family time. And one of the persons that we studied with said that like often I always was confused by this because you're not supposed to work. You're not supposed to like create things on it, but like sex is a big part of Sabbath often, right? Like that's something that like people often engage in. And like, because there's something about uniting and bonding that also takes place. It's this intentional, like cyclical practice that you go back to week in and week out. And I don't know, I just really think that this word intentional is the difference between like, oh, I'm so tired, I'm going to veg out and watch Netflix all day versus I'm going to be intentional about doing what I need to do on a regular basis to make sure that my body not only refuels, like Mitchell said in his sermon, right? Like there's an important part about refueling, but there's also more than that too, right? There's refueling, but there's also like, one, there's a doing this because there's something holy and sacred in this process, this cyclical nature. But then also like an invitation and openness to then experience God in a whole new and different way beyond just like, what am I going to accomplish too?
Mm-hmm. So two things about that that came to mind for me as far as the music goes from yesterday. That's what the last hymn spoke to. Come and find the quiet center in the crowded life we lead. Find a space for hope to enter. Find the frame where we are freed. So I love this text. I actually I come back to it a lot. People may know this if they've worshiped with us, for several years, that this is one of the hymns we sing quite a bit because it's so rich. I mean, it talks about exactly that find the frame where we are freed, and it's this structure and intentionality in the crowded life we lead. And so I think that's what came to mind, is that's why I chose it as a closing hymn. Usually I would say 7.5 times out of 10, I'm going to close the worship service with a more upbeat song. And that's when I invite, if you're a kid or a kid at heart, grab an egg shaker, grab a drum, make some music. But I felt like yesterday was important to draw out this, this intentional time of breath and rest. And also that's with words and without words. So Farron's offertory was gorgeous, number one. I mean, whenever I've heard him practicing this for many months, actually, and every time I'm like, oh, that's so pretty. What is that? He's like, it's the same song you asked me about last time. But finally he recorded it, and he was like, yeah, I think this would be really great, because it is restful. I mean, I even think the tune is based in a lullaby, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, that's cool.
So
no, I actually had a couple friends who were, I think, watching probably for the first time. They were worshiping. We don't just watch, we worship together, right? They were worshiping with us online yesterday, and they texted me in the middle of it, and they were like, will you please figure out what that song is? Because I'm always wanting to add to my repertoire of music that I listen to, and it's just incredible. It was so beautiful, and of course Farron played it magically. It was a really awesome piece, and just a great piece in the middle of the service there. While we're on music, I'm so curious because I've been here since July and worshipped with White Rock a couple times before that, but I think this is the first time I've seen you play the flute in a service.
I'm sure it's the first time you've seen me play the flute, because it's been probably 2 years since I've played
it. Oh, wow. Okay.
in Sunday worship, I will say, we several churches have a cooperative Tizay worship service that we did up until the pandemic. Every month. And so
Real
I
fast,
played.
Will you say what Tizay is, just in case people don't know?
Yeah. So Tizay is it's a community in rural France, actually, that is ecumenical, which means it's not just one tradition. It's not just Methodists or just Catholics or anything, but it's a lot of different people from around the world that intentionally hold space for worship, work, silence, and community. And so it's a pilgrimage place for a lot of people to come, and it's specifically geared towards young people. So 18 to 35, I think, is there, or maybe even 18 to 30, is their kind of demographic of they want to create a contemplative space for young people, because the brothers feel that is so, so, so lacking in the world. Older folks tend to, and this is one of the reasons I love older folks, tend to have enough life wisdom to know that they need to seek out contemplation and silence and ritual. Younger folks are really bad at that. Sometimes,
Sure.
there are always exceptions. So I'm speaking in generalities. But yeah, so Tizay is a community out of which a lot of worship music comes. That's we use them a lot in worship. So bless the Lord, my soul. Come and fill our hearts with your peace. So a lot of the songs we sing that are short, repetitive, they allow you to pray while you're singing, come from the community of Tizay. And they're typically driven by instrumentalists. So I've never been to the community. I would love to go sometime in France. I think Mitchell's been. I know Neil has.
We just don't want to travel at this point somewhere, right?
Yeah, right. Anyway, so that was kind of a sidebar. But yeah, I played flute yesterday, one, because it's a Welsh tune, and I just think of Welsh and kind of these early Irish, Scottish, English tunes as being really, really wonderful with flute, because it's so airy and light and magical almost. But I rarely play flute because I would rather give it away. And we have at least two, I'm probably forgetting some, wonderful flute players in our congregation. And so when the opportunity comes that like an anthem or a hymn needs flute, I would much rather say, hey, Claire, come play this. Hey, AJ, come play this, than have people have to listen to me do one more thing. I mean,
Sure.
I want to give the mic away. So
Diversify a little bit.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it was fun. I love playing it. I love playing flute so much. I'm pretty sure I confused Dexter and Charlie because they were like, "Wait, is she playing flute or singing?
Are people
both.
supposed to be singing with it?
Right.
Is this verse 1? No. No, they did get a little confused with that, but that's okay. People, if you were worshiping with us at home, then you got to sing verse 1 twice, which why not? It was a beautiful verse.
Yeah. But yeah, so I mean, that was a long answer, Phil, to your question of like, I don't play it very often, but I love it when I do. And I think it was kind of it added a little bit of like sparkle to worship. A
little sparkle. I love that. Yeah. No, it was great. I was a big fan. I just thought it added a nice, just a different component, and I love that whenever we can just adjust things a little bit. I think it keeps from things getting stale like that. Not that I don't think White Rock has ever felt stale to me, because I do think that you do a really great job of adjusting things and keeping it fresh.
Yeah. I would say that that's one of the things I miss the most. If I feel like anything's been the biggest challenge during the pandemic since March, it's that I depend on our network of musicians in our church so much. I mean, you just ask like the choir, the folk band, our independent instrumentalists, like I miss them so much. I'm constantly calling them in normal circumstances, being like, hey, 2 weeks from now, we're going to do this piece. Can you come rehearse with Farron on Wednesday and then play on Sunday? I'm like always kind of moving the pieces around, and I just miss it. So,
well, let's keep hoping, right? That sooner than later, we're going to be back and able to do that again. I know.
Totally.
Tough spot. Okay. I mean, what other things? Well, I know we can spend a lot of time probably talking about the scripture text. Were there other things that you found in the service that just really stood out to you or that you loved?
I was actually going to change direction a little bit and talk about Mitchell's scripture, because specifically Dexter asked you a question in the middle of worship that I just found so interesting. I mean, can you recount like what that kind of side conversation was?
Yes, I'm looking at it right now. So if you missed worship yesterday, this is a text from Mark chapter 6, verse 30 through 46. And it's another storm, essentially another storm part where they're in a boat again that gets calmed. Is there a calming of the storm? No, they just go away. They go away to a deserted place in a boat. That's what it is. So the beginning, this is why it seemed like such a really great piece for us. Because at the beginning of the text, it says, come away to a deserted place all by yourselves and rest a while. That's Jesus telling the disciples.
Which, side note, we use that in the call to worship. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I told you during worship, too, I said it makes me keep thinking of, I think, that Norah Jones song, right? Which,
away with me.
Exactly. Like that was running through my head all the time.
Yeah.
Which is a great, like when I captioned this for social media this week, I kept saying, not only is rest an invitation, it's also an imperative. Like come away to a deserted place is like an invitation, but also like, no, this is something you have to do. Okay, so we come away, and the reason we loved this text so much leading into the service was because their goal is to go away and find rest. And then the text tells us that they ran around and beat them to the place they were going, which is really kind of a bit problematic in and of itself if you understand the topography of how the Sea of Galilee works. But when it comes to the Gospel of Mark, don't let the details mess up the story. So they beat them to the place, and they get there.
The crowd beats the disciples.
Thank you. The crowd, right? Yeah. And so they roll up, and I can only imagine being exhausted because the disciples have been out like feeding people, healing people, casting out demons, as people do, right? Just doing their thing.
Just normal Tuesday stuff.
Normal stuff, right? And so they're probably exhausted. It even says they haven't had a chance to eat, which I love that. And they get there, and there's a crowd there. And Jesus, it says, has compassion on the crowd, or I think actually like literally was moved with compassion, which I love that idea of the text. And so they were like sheep without a shepherd, and begins to, like it gets late and the disciples go to him and say like, send them off so they can go find food for themselves. And then he gives them the instruction of you feed them. And then it says they sat them down in groups of 50 and 100. and now I lost my spot again to figure out. Yeah, set down in groups of hundreds and of 50s. And so Dexter's question was, why is it so specific with groups of hundreds and 50s? To which my response initially was, honestly, I'm not sure there's an agreed upon consensus on this. There is some that have said that it's like a structuring or an ordering or like a tiered system even, which to me doesn't make a lot of sense in the text overall. And so like, that's not my favorite interpretation of it. I don't think it makes sense of like, there was like a hierarchy. I don't think that fits specifically well with what I see in the rest of Mark. The other thing that I've read once that said, it's military terminology, right? That people will be broken up military-wise into 50s and hundreds.
I've heard that it's supposed to bolster this idea of Jesus as a king, coming to reign.
And so much of Mark's like underlying theme is a little bit of a jab at the ruling party, if you will, right? Like the empire that is ruling over Rome, that is ruling over this occupied territory. And so to have this kind of like underlying jab here of like Jesus gathering his troops, if you will, right, in groups of hundreds and 50s and feeding them. And like the whole idea here is it's not just that he's giving them bread and fish, right? Like, which is a call back to the Exodus story, right? Like we should be reminded that whenever they were wandering in the wilderness, the Hebrew people, that God provided manna from heaven and it was just enough for each day, right? And then at night they had quail to eat at dinner too. So you have like we're going to root ourselves back in the narrative from the very beginning of who we are as a people. And then we're going to pull it now into like this idea that there is something much deeper going on here. And I taught Pastor's Bible Study on Wednesday, and we talked about how like when you read Mark, there's like the layer of here's the literal reading, like, right? Like the literal reading was they ran around and they beat them to the spot. Like, even though logically that may not make a lot of sense, like maybe you can make a scenario where that happened. And then there's like a next layer, like this story is actually rooting us in who we are as a people of like our heritage, our history, our tradition. And then there's like another layer below it of like, and it's apocalyptic a little bit, like this is where we're going and what's really going to happen. And part of that's because, you know, these gospels were written a generation later, you know, after Jesus basically. And so they have the ability to write this layered, like incredible storytelling opportunity here, where they take the oral traditions of the Christ event, the Jesus narrative, and create just these really deep, beautiful, incredible this storytelling. Really is what it is, right? And people sometimes hear that and they're like, "Are you saying that the gospel is a story and it's not real?" And well, it's actually so real, right? Like
it's both. It is a story and it's real.
Right.
Yeah.
Marcus Borg was a professor, I think, at Oregon State, and he would always say there's the truth and there's a truth behind the truth. And when you read scripture, you have to find both of those.
Well, and I was drawn to, so when you said, you know, there's a literal meaning, and Richard Rohr has a saying that says literalism is usually the lowest and least level of meaning. And I don't take that as because Richard Rohr tends to say things in a really direct but still compassionate way. I don't take that as a jab at folks who find literal meanings in the Bible very, very meaningful and hold them dear.
Right.
I do think it's a challenge not to stop there. So, you know, this question, and it's not just about the hundreds and 50s, but like there are multiple versions of these feeding of the multitudes, either 5,000 men, 12,000 people, 4,000 people. You know, we have lots of different figures.
Right.
But the leftovers, right? 12 baskets, 7 baskets, right? I've heard the interpretation that is inclusive of Jews and Gentiles, because 12 is a holy sacred number in Judaism, and 7 is a holy, and 7 is a holy and sacred number in Greek culture.
Well, and in the Hebrew too, right? The completion, the 7 days of creation. Yeah, there's absolutely, and the 12, not only 12 tribes, but then the 12 disciples too, right? Like there's a continued theme of numbers there.
Yeah.
Numbers typically play an important part whenever you see numbers.
But also, it's not necessarily the literal numbers, you know. And so I find that truth behind the truth, you know, a really important thing for us to remember as we examine these gospel stories, right? Stories that are still beautiful and true.
Yeah.
But the other thing I was thinking too, I heard a sermon, a speech, kind of. I was very blessed to be part of the onstage band at the International UMW convention in 2014.
Oh, that's cool.
It was fantastic. It was like me and 8 other women. It was an
Hold
all-female band.
on. You know, the intro talks about a nerdy conversation. When you just said the international gathering of United Methodist women, you were just so amped up about it. Like I got hit being like breath nerdy yesterday, and now you're showing off your nerdiness on the fact that you were so excited. Okay, go ahead.
It was great. Like over 6,000 people, mostly women, in the attendance, and the band was many races and from many different states and anything. It was awesome. But one of the speakers there broke apart this narrative of feeding of the 5,000, and she truly blew my mind that I still am kind of trying to live with this interpretation that she brought to this text, saying, what if one of the real miracles of this story was not that Jesus could multiply the bread and fish, which he could, and that would be a miracle and amazing. What if a miracle would be that almost everybody did have a little bit of food in their own pocket, but they were too afraid to bring it out and show it because they were afraid they wouldn't have enough for themselves? Mm-hmm. And what if the real miracle was that once they started seeing people express their generosity and the disciples kind of helping them organize and trust each other, that they brought out their own food to share with their neighbors? That, I mean, and to me, that is just as big a miracle as literal multiplication of bread, is that a group of thousands of humans with all of our faults could be moved to generosity in such a big way that they would share what little they had so that everybody had enough.
Yep. Yeah, it says a lot to this idea of like scarcity versus abundance. And often like we hold on to the things thinking that we're going to run out of. That's
a very Mitchell thing to say, by the way. So even though he's not here, like we're channeling Mitchell when we say like abundance and scarcity.
Well, he's here in spirit then. Yeah. And I think it says a lot about kind of like a grassroots organizing, right? And that the early Christian movement was very much a grassroots organizing movement. And is it called to us then to continue in that grassroots organizing movement, right? Really investing in and empowering individuals to be a part of the beloved community there. We'll use another word that Mitchell uses often.
Love it.
Yeah.
I think overall it was a really rich Sunday, and I hope and pray that we as a staff can take our own advice too and take today to rest. I think something else that came forward for me in this scripture passage was the expectation of the crowds that their spiritual leaders didn't need to rest. They needed to serve them. And I have been very fortunate to be in churches that do not think that way. They encourage us. I mean, I even saw one of the comments yesterday saying, Mitchell, don't ever apologize for taking time. Like, you need this time. But I'm just reminded of so many of our brothers and sisters in leadership in faith traditions around the world, not just Christianity, where it's expected of us to burn the candle at both ends. If anybody needs anything, we need to set our own needs aside. We need to set our family aside. And it just hit me how unhealthy that is, and how grateful I am to have our community, but to have this intentional day set aside to rest.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, Sabbath and rest is really kind of punk, right? Like, it's really taking it to the man and saying, like, I see you, capitalism, and I'm going to, like, I'll put it this way, shake a fist at you, right? And say, no, like, not today, right? Like, today we're going to take a break. And I think it's great from a Labor Day standpoint. And I love that the country has set aside a day like this. Like, it's really fascinating that's become what it has become. We'll just leave it there. But I do love, and I think that Sabbath is this punk version of theology of, no, we're not going to get caught up in this. We are going to take a break, we can.
I'm just imagining like Avril Lavigne, circa 2007. Sabbath for the masses, man.
Totally, absolutely. Avril was a theologian. She just didn't. Maybe she did know it. Maybe she did.
Yeah.
I think it's really fascinating, and I'll tell a quick story, and we can kind of wrap up, and if you have something too, but I couldn't go to sleep last night. Like, and this is how ridiculous I am right now because I am an extrovert. I think we talked about this yesterday in the sit down as well. I had 2 fantasy football drafts, which I wasn't even going to do fantasy football this year. But when people kept inviting me, I was like, yeah, I'll do it because it's an opportunity for interaction. Like, I don't even think the NFL season is going to make it because I think that it's all going to get shut down. But I was like, yeah, I'll come to a live fantasy draft so that I can have interaction with people. And so I had 2 of them last night. And the last one didn't end until 11:30, which is way past my bedtime.
Oh, yeah, me too. And
so I was like, you know what? Tomorrow is Labor Day. I'm going to turn off my alarm. Or actually, I moved it back an hour. So at 7 rather than 6. And I was like, it's my last day before my kids have to go back to school. Like, I'll just sleep in a little bit tomorrow. And I was really proud of myself for just allowing myself that space, right? And then this morning, my alarm went off. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to get back in bed. And so I stayed in bed until 7:45 this morning. And it was glorious. And I loved every minute of it. And my kids got up and took care of themselves, which is also glorious. And so I thought, yeah. This was. I'm allowing myself permission to do that today.
Yeah.
Because I don't know when I'll get to do it again. So
yeah.
So I'm glad we had that conversation yesterday. Thank you for that.
Me too. And like, I know we're at time, but I sometimes think that we rest because we have no choice, and I'm trying to get better at resting before I have no choice. Like sometimes my body. I got a migraine yesterday. Afternoon, and that's when my body's saying like, you're not going to do anything for 12 hours. Oh, wow. You're going to lay as still as possible in a dark room and pray a lot. Like,
yeah.
But I'm trying to get better. So I encourage anybody who's listening or watching, like, just maybe take it as a personal challenge to rest before you think you need to. Rest before you collapse. It's okay.
Totally. I love that. That's a really great invitation and imperative, right? Like here we are again, an invitation and an imperative that you have to rest. Just got to do it. Well, so we mentioned the Sunday sit down a couple of times here on this podcast today. You can actually, in the same channel on our White Rock UMC channel on our podcast, you can find the Sunday sit down now. We put up last week's and I'll put up this week's as well. And then you can also find Mitchell's sermon on the same podcast channel. And as Rebecca said, you can find it all on our YouTube channel and on our Facebook. So all of the content is all out there in the internets and the worlds. And so
many choices.
If you can't find it, you're not looking. But if you are looking and can't find it, let us know and we're happy to help you.
Totally.
Yeah. So, hey, thanks so much for this. I enjoyed this conversation, and I really did enjoy our Sunday sit down. I posted, like I shared the link yesterday, and my mom tagged my sister in it, and she was like, I think you need to hear this morning, which I was like, oh, I love that. So
absolutely.
It's good. So, well, all right, everybody have a wonderful Labor Day, and we'll see you back next week.
Take care. You've been listening to a podcast on White Rock United Methodist Church.
Love it.
East Dallas. I don't remember the rest of his exit, but
I think we nailed it.